So I'm Gina Johnson, the Editorial Director of Motivate Media Group here in Dubai. We are the most established and longest standing publisher of English magazines in the region, having been in business here publishing proprietary and contract titles for almost coming up to 40 years very soon. So we have a long perspective of how publishing and media has worked in the region.
Duncan, I caught you in mid-gulp there.
Yeah, hi. Duncan Edwards, I'm the President and CEO of Hearst Magazine's International. We're a division of Hearst Corporation, which is a large American media company. And it's a pretty large cross-border publishing business that I'm responsible for. We're active in more than 60 countries with a mixture of owned and operated companies, joint ventures, and licenses, which is how we operate here in Dubai in the GCC with ITP through license agreements. And we publish brands like Cosmopolitan, Harper's Bazaar, Good Housekeeping, Elle, in print and digital formats. And it's been nice sitting here actually for the last couple of days. I've heard lots of very nice things about our company. We seem to be used as an example of good things in a lot of the presentations, which is nice to see. Of course, I know the reality. We're not as perfect as some of these presentations may make out, but we're certainly having a reasonably good time.
Duncan missed out his most important role.
I did, yes. I'm also the chairman of the FIPP since October. Thank you for the reminder. And the advertisement is, if you have enjoyed this conference and you've found it valuable and you've made some good contacts here and you're not a member of the FIPP, then please join. There's a 10% discount for those who join today.
And the reason it's the most important is this is the man who signs off my expenses. So, Sid, explain.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the director at Africa Business News. Speaking of licenses, we license the Forbes and CNBC brands across sub-Saharan Africa. We operate in 4 distinct areas: in television, print, events, and online. And I specifically look after our print and online division.
I just want to get a sense of scale here because I think the audience will appreciate it. We've talked a lot about print and digital, and roughly what would be the revenue split? How important is print, digital to Motivate, and how is that changing?
Well, it's a question that all publishers globally are asking at the moment. Still for us, digital is a relatively small component in terms of the overall revenue. We're expecting it to represent between 10 and 20% by 2017. What we're seeing, which I think mirrors the experience of more developed publishing markets, is year-on-year growth exponential to any other form. So we're looking at least 50% growth year-on-year for digital revenues. But print still is a very vital and important part of our media mix. This is a region that still very much respects the quality and collectability of print, and that's evident not just in the growth of some of our print magazines in terms of circulation and revenue in the last couple of years, but also our books publishing division, where we publish more than 200 titles. So, like everyone else, we're seeing digital as a huge opportunity for us. We want to capitalise on that. I think we're really pioneering that in terms of the content that we're offering digitally, both to our audiences and to our commercial partners. I think we're leading that charge here in this region, but it will always be a balance between quality print publication and digital for us.
Okay, so print still matters, but digital is growing fast.
Yes.
Duncan, Hearst is huge. I mean, but it's changing rapidly. I mean, it's
yeah. Hearst has lots of divisions. We're in business information, so business media. What developed out of our old business publishing division, that is now 100% digital business. There's no print left, and almost no advertising in that. That's a subscription digital business. Huge company. In our consumer media businesses, television, newspapers and magazines. In the US, digital ad revenue is now around 15% of the ad revenue business. It's mainly an advertising business in the US. Consumer revenue is relatively modest. Outside the US, it varies. We have some markets where digital revenue is very high. Japan's an example where digital revenue is around 40% of our total revenue in Japan. And Russia is actually a little bit more than that now. So we've built a big digital business in Russia. Got, believe it or not, 1,200 people working in digital media in Russia in our company. And more than 40% of our revenue is from digital in Russia. So it varies from country to country.
But if it's 40% at the top, 10 to 20 is not outrageous. Sid, what's your experience? What's the print-digital mix?
Well, at the moment, given that we do operate in television as well as a group, TV commands the largest slice of our revenue pie. So digital, I would say, is roughly about 10%. Of that mix, subscription revenue is pretty non-existent at the moment. It's all ad revenue. And at times when we approach some of our larger clients, because we operate purely in the business media genre, it's an interesting internal discussion that we have to have when we sell a concept or a 360 campaign to a client of how much we end up allocating internally to print, digital, and sort of television, given that all the brands sort of fall under one management team and one sort of P&L. So I think the simple answer is 10%, but growing exponentially year on year, albeit of a smaller base.
Okay, that gives us a good fix. Let's move on to content, because we've heard a lot about content today. Mark is getting frustrated at content talked about as commodity. You're an editorial director.
I can love talking about content. Fire away.
Is great content enough?
It's not enough anymore.
Is it enough?
It's not enough, no. It's certainly important. I think it's the linchpin. It's one of the most important things. But really, it's a triumvirate of solutions. It's quality content. Not even quality anymore. I think I go so far as to say it's got to be captivating content, because we're living in an era of the commoditization of content. Everybody is a content producer now. So it's captivating content. It's very targeted and well thought out audience channels, and it's very strong brand USPs. And I think those three things combined create a success story around a brand.
I mean, you've famously talked about it, this being a great opportunity because we produce great content. But is that enough, Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, when we had the big congress in Toronto, I think I started my presentation by saying that there's never been a better time to be in the content business. And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, if you think about it, the kind of traditional friction between publishers and the consumer, you know, the physical distribution of content through, you know, magazines, you know, trucks, you know, wholesale, retail, points of sale. Most of that goes away in a digital world with the huge number of smartphones that are available everywhere in the world. So, huge opportunity. Of course, that means the same opportunity is open to everybody. I mean, it's not just open to us as publishers with our roots in print. It's open to everybody. So, what gives us an advantage? And I do believe there's a massive advantage for good quality publishers with their roots in print. The first thing is we know how to do it. We're journalists. This is something that, you know, requires professional skills, and amateur content production, in my view, looks like amateur content production. And there's a huge amount of crappy content out there. And I think that quality publishers with their roots in print or their roots in, you know, newspapers or their roots in television, but who embrace professional journalism of all sorts, light or serious, or whatever it may be, are going to be the winners. And the second thing is about voice. And, you know, it's very easy to write a story about something, but writing it in a voice that is going to be consistent and recognizable across multiple stories and across multiple geographies is difficult, and it takes skill, and it takes takes self-knowledge about what your brand stands for. And in my view, a lot of the kind of citizen journalism and a lot of the kind of newer, pure play content producers just don't do that very well. So if you look at ComScore rankings or Live Nation rankings or any of the other measures of audience, and you see who's winning in the digital environment in terms of audience, it's more and more it's professional, journalistic-based publishing companies like us. And I don't think that's any real surprise.
Sid, I suspect you're going to nod and agree with what's been said. So let me push it on a slightly different way. We claim as an industry to produce great content. So why doesn't the consumer pay for it?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think if you look at the evolution of the internet, a lot of content was freely available from sort of the onset, and there was this whole question about piracy. So generally as consumers, I think we've been trained to expect content for free and pay for the access, as my colleague from Kenya pointed out yesterday. So it does present numerous challenges around monetization models for content producers, and creating quality content is expensive. It's not as simple as pulling out a handy cam or setting up a WordPress blog and publishing content. So it's, on one hand, it's how we've been trained. On the other hand, I don't know if I agree with that statement altogether. Looking at the likes of Netflix, Hulu, Apple TV, they've actually been able to build very successful subscription-based models for video content show. So I think the trick is going to be in perhaps the freemium model that the New York Times has very successfully implemented. The Economist does the same thing, gives you access to a number of articles for free, and then you sort of pay for your monthly subscription. So I don't know if we are going to see or live in an age where we are constantly going to find consumers not paying for content. I think it may evolve, but it goes back to the creation of quality content.
Gina, and do you have paid content plans for your content online?
No, we don't at this stage. We monetize our digital business through other means, and I think this is where we've seen great opportunities grow for solutions like content marketing solutions, which are very prevalent in the digital space. And I think the key to that is really, it does come back to content again, because even when you're talking about commercial content and the development of content marketing, the key to winning that battle is to create engaging, relevant content for a third party that is just that, but then also delivers some insight or something useful to the audience. That's a fine line to tread, because the most sophisticated advertisers understand that the hard sell doesn't necessarily work in that respect. So it's about creating nuanced content that provides value that also services a commercial need. So, in answer to the question, the paid content model, I really don't see that as something. It's not in our immediate plans. I think my view on that, generally speaking, though, is that, I agree that if you give people something for free for a decade, it's very difficult to ask them to pay for it. I think the key to that really is, though, you need to provide, if you were to provide the consumer with something that they need as opposed to something that they want, they will pay for it. But that's very challenging, and I think that's a great example with something like Netflix. Most people would go without, going to a restaurant once a week in order to pay for their Netflix subscription. So they really need that. I think that's really the key to it in the future.
And what's the Hearst experience on paid content models, Duncan?
Generally disappointing. I suppose, there are so many organisations that are completely committed to free, including kind of state-owned organisations like BBC and so on. They're so committed to free that it's kind of hard to see how a paid model in general, information, general entertainment content is going to take. So we're not spending a lot of time on it, to be honest, unless And until someone finds a model that looks like it's going to work, we're going to focus most of our effort and energy on our free web model, which is doing pretty well. We're invested in the company that's now called Texture, which is what was Next Issue Media, which is the consortium of US publishers, us and Time Inc. and can't remember who else is in it. I think Condé are in it. I think Meredith are in it, which has that all-you-can-eat model, for like a Netflix model. Yeah, we'll see. It's not really where I'm spending any of my time, if I'm honest.
Okay, so it's tough, really tough to make the consumer pay. Let's talk about the other revenue stream then, advertising. And we've heard a lot about native advertising. And is this something that's done a lot in this region, Gina?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really the future of advertising in this region. And if you're able to get ahead of that curve and really offer some fantastic ideas and solutions in that space, I think that publishers and media owners in this region will really do well. Like I said, it's not a simple equation. You really do need to have that added value in content marketing. You need to have the insight of value, of what is valuable to the audience in order to deliver the right solution to your commercial partner. So I think this is where publishers can really, especially traditional publishers, can really come into their own in this new era, because advertisers need content, and they need content that is going to market their goods and services, and we are the purveyors of captivating content. So, I mean, again, I go back to this idea of the commoditization of some forms of content, and even more so is the commoditization of tech solutions. There's probably 100 companies within the vicinity of 5 miles of here who could produce websites and apps and social media campaigns for you. My 15-year-old son, who's studying computer science in secondary school, could build you a basic app or website. But what are we? What is our expertise as an industry? We are the purveyors of quality content, and I think if that is at the grassroots of everything we do, then I think we'll see success in content marketing as it evolves.
But there's a moral dilemma here, isn't there? How do you know where to draw the line? And do you know what I mean? Do you have separate editorial teams for the native content?
No, this is a really interesting question and point, because I see the modern editor. I'm a journalist myself, it's my background, but I really see the contemporary editor as being primarily a journalist, but they are part journalist, they are part marketeer, they are part brand ambassador, they are part business manager. I don't think that you can really succeed in this industry anymore, with very few exceptions of brands that have such strong legacies. And when I think of those brands, I'm thinking of magazines like Vogue and Vanity Fair. But even then, I know Condé Nast are making huge changes in the US market to their business models. You have to be all of those things. And at the end of the day, the judge of whether your content is good enough or not is the audience. So if the audience is reading your content, if the advertiser is selling their products, by the same token, then your message, your content, your delivery has been successful.
And your experience in this, what's it like in your market?
Well, I think the sooner we embrace native content as editors and publishers, I think the better. Looking at some of the stats we've talked about over the last few days on ad blocking and ad blocking technology, I think one of the easiest fixes around generating digital revenue is to embrace the whole concept of native content, native advertising. Going back to something that has been mentioned earlier, it's in the quality of execution and in sort of not misleading the consumer or the reader, but at the same time delivering an experience that is consistent with the rest of your content. So we've seen some very successful implementations. In fact, in our publishing business, the native sponsored content that we produce seems to do a lot better than single-page advertising. Looking at the same thing online, some of the native articles we produce for clients in the cloud and telecommunications industries have actually done better than content that our editorial team has produced that's not been sponsored. So this is content about how cloud technology can ultimately help your business succeed and things of that nature. So I'm personally all for it. I don't necessarily think there's an ethical dilemma as long as it's clearly marked as something that has been paid for, no matter how small or whatever font size you use to make that declaration.
You're already pushing the line. 6 point?
5.5
8 point?
if it allows me to.
I mean, Duncan, clearly Hearst do lots of native advertising. I've got some advice for people who are,
Well, it's interesting, isn't it?
wrestling.
I've found over the years that the further east you go, the more blurred the line is between editorial and advertising. And we're kind of Middle East here, so it's probably, I think our view is that the regulations that are being discussed in both the USA and the UK will create sensible guidelines for publishers to work within. And hopefully the US and the UK will come to similar conclusions. I don't know, I'm looking at Barry here, but it's active discussions at the moment in both places. And there have been some warning shots fired across the bows of some fairly large publishers. I think that's quite right too. There should be a distinction between pure editorial and advertorial, if you like, and we shouldn't try to disguise that. Consumers are canny and smart enough to understand that. At Hearst, we have really three broad types of commercial content. If an advertiser wants to give us their content and ask us to publish it, we will label that as provided by name, the brand. We don't advise that. It doesn't work very well. Consumers usually just click through it. They're not interested. If at the other end of the continuum, we'll listen to a brand and we'll say, look, we'll surface content that is relevant to your brand, but you'll have nothing to do with the writing of that content. And we call that sponsored by. This is just, editorial about fashion under a sponsored by name of a fashion company, for example, but no editorial mentions, nothing like that. And then there's the sort of more middle ground, the kind of classic advertorial where the journalist works on a story that has merit in its own right, but works in partnership with the brand, and there could be contextual mentions of the brand in that. And then we clearly label that as brand plus brand, so Cosmopolitan plus L'Oreal. So 100% clear that this is a sponsored piece of content. I don't know. I hope that works. We'll see. That we're being very open with the regulators about our approach, and if it does work, then we will try to enforce that as an approach in our businesses, further east from here as well, where it's a bit like the Wild West and Wild East. Interesting enough, last year, the single best performing piece of content we had in the Hearst network was a piece of commercial content. It's a fantastic story about date night hairstyles, sponsored by L'Oreal, which I'm modeling today. So.
Perhaps that's a story we should let the world know about, because that's really
well,
interesting.
the other thing is, and we have done study after study after study, which suggests that when an advertiser creates content and markets it themselves on their own websites, on YouTube, on all the platforms, and then you compare the performance of that content to a piece of content that has been produced by one of our magazine brands, one of our journalists, with the wrapper of Cosmo or Bazaar, the performance in terms of engagement, sharing, that sort of thing, is between 50 and 100 times greater. Not not 1 or 2 times greater, but 50 to 100 times greater if the imprimatur of a famous magazine brand is given to the content. And yeah, I don't think anybody who works in our industry is surprised by that, but we have to get that message out. And it's probably, with all due respect to lots of other magazines, it may not be as high for every magazine as it is for Cosmo and Bazaar or Elle, but it will be higher than what a brand does without that imprimatur, without that endorsement of a magazine.
I'm sure that's right. And just on the guidelines, in December, the USA Federal Trades Commission issued a paper suggesting what the guidelines should be. And this is the step before they go legal. So, and it's a document worth reading. It's not a racy piece of journalism, but it's really important information. I'd urge you to go and have a look at it. We've talked also in the last sort of day and a half of people, talent. What's the hardest role to fill in your organisation today?
I think currently it's people with very good digital sales experience. Because of the changing nature of that medium, it's so difficult to stay ahead of it, and that's really what you need to do. It's not just about having your finger on the pulse of that medium, you have to be 2 pulses ahead of it. So because our publishing model here in the Middle East is very driven by advertising revenue, it's absolutely integral for us to have people who understand the digital evolution from a commercial perspective. So that would be the most challenging role to fill. So
digital sales. And instead, what's the biggest gap, the toughest jobs to fill in your organisation?
Absolutely. I think I would sort of look at both financial journalism and sales in general as the 2 toughest positions to fill. Financial journalism, because it doesn't really exist as a skill set in the African continent. We find that, and let's not look at South Africa being the most developed from an infrastructure and education point of view, but in markets like Nigeria, Ghana, Rwanda, and Kenya that we operate, you would find somebody that's either a good journalist or somebody who's a good financial analyst, but you don't tend to find the 2 married in one person. So those are often challenges that we have to deal with in terms of finding people that are comfortable with business language and journalism at the same time. From a sales point of view, our products or our brands are a bit different to some of the other titles that exist or sort of channels that exist in the market today. Everybody seems to be going after the mass market, but we are inherently niche. And niche in a continent that has more unemployment and poverty than affluent consumers. So the core ethos of both Forbes and CNBC is alignment of a client's or marketer's brand with our brands and our quality content. And to find salespeople, and this is across different disciplines, whether it be online or print and television, that has been a challenge. And then if you take it a step further, it's finding somebody who can sell print, television, and online at the same time, because that's sort of the approach that we have taken in terms of integrating our campaigns and our ad sales team.
Duncan, everyone wants to work for Hearst. You've got no problems, have you?
Yeah, everybody does seem to want to work for Hearst, but then everybody wants to hire someone away from Hearst as well. So we do have some issues dependent upon the market. UK, USA, very fluid workforce and lots of turnover. Same was true in China for a long time, although that's slowed down a little bit. I think no real difference. I mean, we have high quality digital ad sales are hard to find and keep, and ad ops in digital and software developers, particularly on the more boring side of software development, which needs to be done. So DevOps and so on is hard to find.
Okay, more generally, Sid, what keeps you awake at night? What do you worry about?
There are a number of things that keep me up. The volatility in the currency markets today is definitely something that has heavily impacted our business. And I'll just give you an indication. The South African rand to the dollar was about 7 rand When I moved to South Africa 5 years ago, it's 16 today, or near about. Roughly 35% of our expenses are denominated in pounds, euros, or dollars. And this is everything from license fees to our brand partners, to fiber optic connectivity across the continent, to satellite transponders, to even printing costs and cost of ink and paper that we source from Europe. So that presents numerous challenges. Political stability in certain markets that we operate in is also a challenge. I think these are certain macroeconomic factors, and then of course the lack of established distribution networks. Now, we were talking about the importance of content. Some of the things that I think publishers possibly take for granted in the developed world are newsstand sales. Now again, ex-South Africa, newsstand distribution doesn't really exist in a country like Nigeria. If anybody's been to Lagos or Abuja, you essentially do a lot of your shopping while you're stuck in traffic for 3 hours on the way from Lekki Island towards wherever you sort of live. So these are the things that present challenges and can't always be mitigated.
Gina, what keeps you awake at night then?
Chris, I sleep pretty well at night, I've got to say. I think in terms of what things would you worry about for the business, I think that being in the business of communications, it's ironic, but every business almost wants to find ways to communicate better internally. But I have to say, this is a really exciting time to be in media. We're seeing more changes and an evolution of a scale that we've never seen before. And when you combine that with working in an emerging market environment like we are here in the Middle East, what comes with that is this an entrepreneurial and almost maverick spirit. Then I think, I see it only as an opportunity. Of course, there's a lot of discussion at the moment around 2016 and the economic climate and how that will affect us. But that's, we'll face new challenges every year. I'm sure if we were sitting here this time next year, there would be other challenges as well. But no, generally I sleep pretty well. And
so the sun never sets on the Hearst Empire, so I guess sleep is for wimps anyway, Duncan. What keeps you awake?
You've asked me this question before, and I always say the same thing. This is only work. It's nothing that important, so it shouldn't keep you awake at night. There are so many business issues also that you can't do anything about. Currency issues. I wish. We have a very big business in Russia. We had a very big business in Russia. I think when I started working on that business, you could buy $1 for 24 rubles, and now it's 85 rubles. So that has an impact on your profitability when you're a dollar-denominated company, as you can imagine. But these are things. There's not a lot you can do about the sort of the commodities super cycle or the sort of ridiculous geopolitical issues that are having such a big impact at the moment. So you've got to focus on things you can do something about, and I'm with you. Most of those are about growth. Most of those are about what you can do. So I try to spend my time on making sure we have the best consumer products we can have. I spend a huge amount of time on content, working with and talking to editors. And then I spend a huge amount of my time trying to sell advertising at the most senior level that I can reach around the world. And then, 3 or 4 times a year, you have to make a big decision, about something that will have large financial implications down the track, about whether to, launch a company in a market or exit a company in a market or something like that. But as I say, it's only work, so it shouldn't interrupt your sleep.
It's probably a healthy attitude. We've got 1 minute. I'm going to see if there are any questions from the floor. There is Richard in the middle with the microphone.
Hello, Amir Safir, Chief Editor of The Review of Religions. I just wanted to pick up the point on Netflix. It seems like everyone's mentioning it as an example where before people were illegally for a long time downloading movies, and they've managed to find a model where you now find young people happy to pay this money. The only thing they did was pass around passwords of Netflix, but they got around that by providing many users for it. So my question is, why can this same model not be replicated in the magazine industry? I know there are certain platforms that provide access to many magazines, but why can that same model not be replicated in the magazine industry to that level of influence and success? Is that possible? And if not, why not? I mean, in terms of monetizing content in an effective way, where almost everyone is subscribing to it.
Who would you like to answer that?
Oh, anyone.
Anyone?
Everyone.
Well, I'll try. I mean, there are companies that are trying to do that. So there are many companies that are offering a service to consumers where you pay a monthly fee, and all the magazine content of the magazine publishers who provide their content to that service is available to be read. The company I mentioned, Texture, is doing that. There's a few others. There's some in Europe. Readly, Magster. There's quite a few of these companies. Zinio, sort of. And there's quite a few companies that do this. And so far, at least, the problem has been that. Well, clearly not. No, I mean, the problem is, so far, the consumer has not been convinced that the product, even when it's done in an all-you-can-eat, way, is as compelling as the TV series, the TV shows on Netflix. I think they're probably right. I mean, as a consumer offering, Netflix for $9 is a pretty compelling offer.